Should we move on to the sprint qualifying then?
Yeah, I was just about to say, not to worry, because no points were awarded on Friday this week, but Saturday there were points up for grabs for another sprint race, which I managed to sit down and watch. And it felt like it went by very quick, and it was very procedural. I thought it was less interesting than Silverstone. Comparing to Silverstone, which one did you prefer?
I found them both pretty underwhelming, to be honest with you. It's not that it doesn't impact the race, because obviously it does to some extent, and it just feels a bit too insubstantial. And much like the British Grand Prix, we got a few laps of excitement, and then the remaining 12 or so, we were just sort of waiting for the end. Bottas did very well off the line, but I never really felt like there was ever going to be much of a battle happening with Verstappen, because, of course, Bottas doesn't really have much to lose, and also not a whole lot to gain either, other than 3 points, which is not going to make a huge difference to his place in the standings. And Verstappen doesn't need to fight, he just needs to keep it clean, stay in P2, and he knows that because of Bottas's engine penalty, he's going to be starting at the front of the grid. There was kind of nothing really going on there. The only battle I think we really saw was Hamilton on Norris. And that was a great little battle for a little while as Hamilton was trying to get past. That was really the only big action that I can really think of that would constitute, real sort of racing between two cars.
Yeah, I think the majority of the grid stayed the same. Hamilton dropped down a couple of places, which is uncharacteristic for him.
He usually
gets had a very poor start, and that's not. He kind of just got swamped, and he looked at the onboard replay. He went to go defend to the left, and then he thought, well, that's a lost cause, so I'll defend to the right. And then Norris got past him. And I think he just felt like he was in no man's land, and cars were flying left, right, and centre. But going back down the grid, you got Pierre Gasly, who qualified officially on Friday in 6th, and then DNF during the sprint race because he knocked off his front wing or damaged his front wing going into the first chicane. And then obviously you've got that high speed right hander, and everyone saw it on the helicopter cam, this wing dragging on the floor, sparking quite impressively. But like we've seen before, as soon as that wing gets dislodged and goes under the front of the car, you're a passenger. And that's all what happened. It went underneath the car. Luckily, there was gravel because that slowed his car down quite a bit. If that had been traditional runoff by just tarmac or abrasive ground, that would have been a huge impact. What did you make of that?
It's an almost exact repeat of what happened in Bahrain, isn't it? Because it was also Ricciardo then that he clipped on the rear as well. And he's hit Ricciardo again here on the back and wiped out his front wing. It's a shame, but he's only got himself to blame, really. I think he should have been a little bit more cautious going into the Rettifilo, and then when he's at the Curva Grande, like you said, surely he genuinely didn't see. You think he'd noticed that his front wing is kind of hanging off, and he tries to go for the corner anyway, and he just ended up in the wall. So a shame, but yeah, that's just another bit of a misstep for Pierre when really he should have been capitalising. And to go out on lap 1, it was an awful weekend for AlphaTauri considering what happened.
It really was.
Last weekend, I think that they got only a handful of laps in and both cars were out. So
yeah, Daniel Ricciardo was quite lucky, given the impact of the front wing was big enough to damage it and knock it off its pivot point. I'm surprised Daniel didn't get a rear puncture. I was quite concerned when I saw that he qualified so well. And after I saw that impact, I thought, please don't be a slow puncher, because as soon as you have a pit stop in this race, it's game over. Like, you'll be starting from the back of the grid. You might as well retire and save the engine. But luckily for everyone involved, Daniel did not get a puncture, and beautiful things went on to happen later on in the race weekend. Shall we move on to the race? Should we move on to the good stuff?
I was gonna add just a couple of small things for sprint qualifying. I know I want to talk about sprint qualifying. Very, very strange indeed.
You have to say
it's there was a couple of interesting little bits. Like we discovered why, and I've always wondered this. We discovered why there's no DRS zone after Ascari. So I've always wondered why they don't just add another DRS zone there, because it's a really long straight. It's another possible overtaking opportunity. But apparently the drivers generally don't brake before the parabolica, and thus there's no mechanism to close the rear wing, because it's when they hit the brake that the flap closes. So that's why there's no DRS zone there. I didn't know that until they mentioned it on the broadcast, which is interesting.
Yeah, neither did I, and I found it more interesting that they don't break into that corner. They might let off a little bit, but 9 times out of 10 they're flat out, which I think is just crazy when you look at the speeds they're doing and the G's they're pulling. Because, well, a modern Formula One car, look what they can do. Absolutely crazy.
Well, speaking of the Parabolica as well, they have apparently renamed it as well.
Yes,
it's not the Parabolica; it's the Alboreto, after Michele Alboreto, who raced for Ferrari in F1 from 84 to 88. I think it's in my notes somewhere. I'll double check that. But yeah, it's been named after him, but everyone still kept calling it Parabolica. And
yes, that's what I noticed.
It's going to be pretty hard to shake that. So they've decided to rename that there. Daniel Ricciardo starting on the front row of the grid for the first time since Mexico 2018, where he was on pole. And it was also, we got a little bit of FIA, a little bit of Red Bull to Michael Massey, and it's a bit of a PR disaster waiting to happen. Really, they don't half sound like whingers when they go into Michael Massey. When he said something like, we need some time to work out if giving the place back is the right thing to do. You remember when Perez wouldn't give the place back? I mean, it seemed pretty open and shut to me. He went past him off the track. How much time do you need to figure it out? But those FIA radios to the stewards, between the stewards and the teams, there's something very unbecoming about those videos, hearing them whinge to Michael Massey. In a way, it's a bit of fun to hear it, and on the other hand, I can't help but cringe and think, like, do you guys realise you're on an international broadcast? And it's the equivalent of complaining to the teacher, like, Miss, you hit me. That's what it feels like. Last little bit for sprint qualifying. Saw an interesting idea on Twitter, and it was that Pirelli could make a tyre just for the sprint qualifying that everyone uses, where all the drivers can push hard and not have to manage them, and they all get that one tyre for the sprint, which is an intriguing idea, because if they really must insist on having these sprint qualifyings, I don't really care for them. I could do without them, to be honest. But if they really insist on having them, they could at least give the drivers the opportunity to push like hell for those laps and not have them worry about tyres and the like. So that's a possible sort of addition to that format.
Because some drivers started sprint qualifying on soft tyres and others started on medium tyres, which I think after the Perez incident, not after the Perez incident, after the Gasly incident, we had a safety car for a couple of laps. Those who were on soft tyres really benefited because you weren't wearing your tyres as much as you would do at normal race pace. So they kept their longevity throughout the whole of the sprint instead of those soft tyres dropping off towards the end. Because I know both McLaren drivers, Lando and Daniel, were worried that towards the end of the sprint qualifying, their pace would completely drop off because they both started on the soft tyres, whereas others around them were on the mediums, and they thought they might be swamped towards the end. But luckily, that safety car really played into the hands of those on the soft. But if we did have one standalone tyre, maybe a little bit more resistant, more resilient than the soft tyre, but less abrasive than the medium, then that could be quite good. I quite like the sound of that, and everyone just starts on the same tyre.
Yeah, surely Pirelli could engineer something that's specifically for that format. It might help a little bit.
We already have
an interesting idea.
5 dry compounds, just for 5 dry tyre compounds, I believe. C1 to C5, and then 2, obviously one intermediate and 1 wet. So at one point we had ultra soft, super soft, medium, hard. I'm not sure if there was an ultra hard or anything like that.
There was a hyper soft at one point.
There was a hyper soft. Yeah, it was. It was the purple or pink rimmed. I can't remember.
It was like a sort of baby pink, wasn't it?
So I'm sure it wouldn't be too difficult to magic up another tyre. Yes, yeah, another tyre. A 1 lap tyre. That's all it was, wasn't it? But yeah, that's not a bad idea actually.